As the importance of bringing the military, academia, and industry together has been stressed here already several times today, we would like to invite for the closing keynote of the day retired Lieutenant General Robert Shea to share his thoughts on the cyberspace state of play as the industry keynote. Lieutenant General Shea is the President and CEO of the Armed Forces Communication and Electronics Association. Prior to assuming this position, he served as the Strategic Solutions Executive Vice President for Smartronix. His last active duty position was the Director of C4 Systems at the Joint Staff. Lieutenant General Shea was also the Principal Advisor to the Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff on all C4 matters at the Department of Defense, where he was responsible for developing nothing else than the first US national military strategy for cyberspace operations. So please welcome Lieutenant General Shea.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be back in town. I was here a few years ago with Kuhn Hisper here, and we did an event here, and I certainly have nothing but great things to say about the hospitality and everything that's been shown to us so far and as it has been in the past. Just to be clear, I'm not from industry. I'm from an association that represents industry, government, and academia in terms of cyber, intelligence, homeland security issues, national security issues, as well as technology issues. So my job is to try to bring industry, government, and academia together to solve problems that fall within those different realms. You know, one of the challenges that I see, and I think General Bianchi brought it up before, was the lexicon. When we talk about cyber, we tend to talk past each other in some cases. Are we talking about the network? Are we talking about data? Are we talking about information operations? Are we talking about resilience? Are we talking about command and control, exploit, attack, all those different things? So I think it was a good sign to hear that the common lexicon is starting to come together here. And I think that's a very important piece. I'm going to start off talking about from a sort of a high-level strategic view, and then I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit and then shift back and forth. I'm going to talk about information. I'm going to talk about social media, and then I'm going to give some thoughts and observations. I've been working in the world of cyber strongly since 1995 when I was Director of Command and Control Communications for what was then the United States Pacific Command. We were the target of the first national military exercise on cyber. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on it, but I've been learning ever since. And as was mentioned, I had the responsibility for putting together the first national military strategy on cyber operations about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But my views on the world of cyber and information operations continue to evolve and change. And I would suggest that is something we all need to be mindful of, that the world is changing, so is this world of cyber information operations and all those things that go along with it. They're evolving as well. From where I'm sitting, and I'm going to give this my perspective, from where I'm sitting, we're in a period of great power competition right now. There's little doubt that we're in this era of competition, pitting authoritarian regimes such as China, Russia, versus democratic governments such as the United States, members of the EU, and the NATO partners. In this light, the importance of cyber and information operations are taking on an increasingly important role. China and Russia bring a whole-of-government approach to cyber and information conflict, and there are less concerns about the legal separations that underpin democratic societies. While their focuses may be different, the end states are very similar. With authoritarian regimes, it's easier to coalesce all the elements of national power versus the debate that can encumber and slow democracies to action. For democracies to effectively compete in this environment, there must be a tighter coupling between all elements of national power and international power, to include academia and like-minded partners. And what I'm referring to the economic, the military, the political, the diplomatic, and the information spheres of what we have to deal with on a regular basis. And all resources need to be brought to bear to deal with the problem in an integrated manner. The stovepipes have to be broken down. And governments need to further and better exchange threat data with industry and academia in a timely, relevant, and actionable manner. There needs to be more than just rhetoric. The overclassification of threat information needs to be re-examined, all the while protecting methods and sources. and democracies need to rapidly adapt and adjust to the new tech-driven environment. Legal frameworks and bureaucracy must adapt as well. Unfortunately, the bureaucracy can be crushing at times, and speed of action is crucial. If we're not in phase 3 of an information conflict, we're on the precipice. Unfortunately, it's not evident to many of the public, and some don't even recognize there is a conflict about. They become numb to the challenge, and perhaps even skeptical. The consequences are not obvious, at least for the present. Where cyber is the battle space, data leading to information and understanding are the crown jewels, and the ability to affect decision-making and speed of action are decisive factors. The two skillfully integrated are a force multiplier, perhaps even the decisive factor in future conflict. Our competitors are continuously moving the pieces on the strategic chessboard. We need to aggressively retake the initiative, open our minds to new ways of doing business, and invest in the development of new technologies and processes while still being mindful of the old ways and methods, because they often form the foundation of future thought. And we must embrace diversity in thought and in action and across the different demographics if we're going to compete. As Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, once said, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. From where I sit, Russia's strategic goal is to fracture the alliance and marginalize NATO and the U.S. relationship, to undermine democratic ideals. They've been involved across the entire spectrum of war, less nuclear, in the last several years. They're employing many old concepts reinforced with new tools and methods. They know how to deftly operate in the gray zone using cyber and information to shape the battle space, influence operations and their political agenda, while keeping the West off balance. A key element for Russia, among others, is sharing and disseminating disinformation and misinformation through social media, the Russian television, Russian internet agency, Russian intelligence, and a host of other surrogates contributing to the effort. They're particularly skilled in weaponizing social media. They have learned to leverage modern digital advertising and marketing techniques and integrate them into practices, as well as investing in and leveraging non-government proxies to mask their efforts. Their focus is to undermine and create seams and weaknesses in the social, political fabric and democratic norms. Now, if I could turn just briefly, or for a few minutes, to China. China is usually using a more subtle set of this silent conflict. They're looking to restore China to what they view as their rightful place in the world. Unfortunately for China, the documented record does not necessarily reflect China's recollection of history. Yet their ultimate goal is to supplant American and Western influence in Asia, the Western Pacific, and beyond, to China's benefit and perhaps even global hegemony. The 2017 Party Congress solidified President Xi's reign and, among other things, gave him extended powers to mandate intel collection by Chinese companies, authorize ownership by the government in those companies to some extent. China is attempting to shape a new world order, efforts such as the Belt and Road Initiative, engagement on influence operation and intimidation in their own right, particularly in their own neighborhood, ignoring international court rulings, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which held that the artificial islands that were being built had no standing. Misinformation and disinformation have become useful tools. International companies are being intimidated into concessions to China that they would not ordinarily make to Western states, surrendering their rights to intellectual property in order to get the opportunity to compete in the Chinese consumer market, all the while using aggregation of information as a base of power. Chinese theft of intellectual property, defense plans, and economic espionage are pervasive. One only has to look at the physical similarities of the J-31 and the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, or the J-20 and the F-22. The US and the Western world are abrogating governance and influence of technical standards bodies thus giving further advantage to China. There is a continued Chinese pressure to buy influence and access to technology in Silicon Valley and to other technical hotspots around the world. They're leveraging the international university system, buying access and influence, tracking, monitoring, and controlling their students through Confucian centers. They are making foreign investment in developing countries and challenging with predatory loans, often referred to as debt trap diplomacy, where inability to repay loans results in a loss of sovereignty over key infrastructure and resources. An example out there, just look what's happened in Sri Lanka or Djibouti. They're buying influence through the lobbying efforts of former public officials and providing personal gain to influential individuals at the expense of other governments, often promoting corruption. They're slowly buying or shaping their strategic message, often a subtle manner. Internally, the Chinese social credit system was designed to provide state control over the population. It is a system designed to ensure the Communist Chinese Party remains in control in light of new technology, exposing the populace of the outside world and the benefits of a free society. They're combining big data, many aspects of artificial intelligence, machine learning, recognition, surveillance techniques, and gate analysis, coupled with aggressive policing to maintain control and influence over the populations. All this is centered around information, the ability to disseminate, collect information. They're gathering comprehensive data on their population and beyond, tying it to their social credit system and promotions and opportunity within their own country. And I would argue you could look and witness the repressive control over the Uyghurs in the West. Internally, China is rapidly moving to the world of George Orwell's 1984. And for those of you who may not have read it, it was published over 70 years ago, where he described the effects of totalitarian government with strict government control and oppression of its citizens. They have recognized that information truly is power. And what does that portend to others in the future if they have access to this information globally? Given this, the question I regularly ask myself is, why would one want to integrate the IT infrastructure of 5G from a company that is strongly influenced by partnership with such an authoritarian regime? A nation widely recognized for theft of intellectual property, one that demonstrates little regard for internationally recognized norms and laws, one that places tight controls and severe penalties over its people, a nation that has potential to negatively impact privacy, national sovereignty of other countries as it develops its international infrastructure and strategy, reinforcing state control. What is the business case for a discounted 5G infrastructure when measured against the loss of freedom, the loss of intellectual property and sensitive data, future political influence, and threats to future security? One where privacy takes a back seat to desires of the party. Do Western leaders really understand the long-term implications of risk of storing key IT infrastructure against the political and economic gains? So in this world of soft confrontation is something I think needs to be taken very seriously. Unfortunately, we have not sufficiently demonstrated the political willpower to address cyber or information confrontation. Western allies are perceived to have established a norm that will not likely respond to attacks in these types of incursions. And the potential ramifications for NATO are significant. What is the point of putting trusted systems on a network that is not secure or vulnerable? I'd like to briefly just turn a minute to social media. Information, particularly when tightly coupled with other elements of national power, is a powerful force, often targeting useful idiots, reinforcing the movement of singular thought. Accordingly, the accumulated power of information and control in the hands of a few, affecting the masses, is something that should be a concern to everyone, particularly free societies. Social media, as well as tools to automate distribution and the selective targeting of information, leveraging advances in artificial intelligence and big data, has made it easier to distribute distorted information to select audiences, even individuals. Biased information, misinformation, and disinformation are being used to divide the populace into select groups or tribes. Fake news is pervasive. Control of the message is the key. For those worried about government eavesdropping, spying, and the affront to civil liberties by government interference and government agencies, I have a question. Are the social media and technology companies collecting more sensitive information than the government? To what end? Sharing it to increase their power and influence? What is the impact on democratic societies? What are they doing with this accumulated information? Selling it, using it for political or economic gain, social stratification, social divide. Imagine the power being placed in the hands of a relatively small group of industry outside of duly elected government officials who are given oversight. Then there's the paradox of social privacy and political consciousness of the GDPR and eagerness of some to partner with a body that enables and even promotes the theft of intellectual property and other sensitive and personal data, one that promotes control over the populace. We need to break down the soda straw that many citizens exhibit, looking only at information that supports their personal views and trusted sources, leading them to be easily swayed by false and misinformation. There is a need to develop programs to help people know how to evaluate trustworthiness of sources and information, one that requires emphasis on critical thinking skills, a skill that has been lost by many. Again, in the battle of information, the Fourth Estate, in my view, has let us down. They have in many ways wittingly or unwittingly become the host and purveyor of misinformation or disinformation. The half-life of truth continues to shrink. In a world that is dominated by information and multiple sources, where does one go to find the truth? I'm often reminded of, when I think about this, of Diogenes going around Athens looking for an honest man. Where does one go to find the truth? Unfortunately, the truth is often buried under a mountain of lies where virility trumps veracity. We traditionally think of conflict and war in kinetic terms. One has to wonder if we're heading toward a world where social media and data-intense technology companies become so powerful that they are viewed as the mortal enemies themselves by nation states and other threat actors. The aggregation and the accumulation of so much data and information puts tremendous power into the private sector. And how that plays out in the context of cyber context and social political norms and beyond has yet to play out. The blurring between nation states and criminal activities continues, while the lack of response to cybersecurity and information activities can unintentionally signal acceptance or lack of resolve. Having said this, some final thoughts. Industry and government are drowning in threat data, highlighting the need for improved automation to separate the noise from the intelligence. We must develop tools for a deeper understanding. Beyond the technical characteristics of attack, we need to know why in order to appropriately shape a response. There is a need for a full court press on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and quantum technology. These are technology races we can't lose. We must recognize that we can't afford to do everything. There's not enough money out there for everything to be done. But we need the intellectual courage and the leadership to focus on the mission and set aside as best we can the nice-to-haves. The cyber domain requires an integrated structure of command and control, the ability to go after the adversary, the ability to defend, the ability to provide intelligence. It needs and a strong command and control structure. Cyber and information needs to be developed also as a tool of statecraft. How do we integrate this into our diplomacy? There is a need to find things that matter most to the adversary and put constant pressure on them. Some may not always be in the cyber domain. Our systems and infrastructure need the resilience to show that attack and exploitation are not worth the effort. We must raise the bar in this regard. And we need a new internet, The one we have now was never intended to do the things that it's been asked to do. It's been, and I would argue there's also a need to review the technical standards and the aptitude standards for key positions in the security and the IT security workforce. Are we attracting the right type of people, the right level of diversity? I don't think so. We need to build a workforce and standards and certifications that approach those required of men and women working in technical industries such as the nuclear power industry. We need our workforce jumping over the standards bar, not tripping over it when it comes to training and certifications. Imagine what lingers in our networks waiting for the directive to activate. The real threat is what we don't know. One could argue that the adversary's A team and maybe even the B team are not getting caught. And finally, there is a need for a tightly focused national and international leadership that has thus far been slow to emerge. We're buried in the bureaucracy, and left to its own devices, the bureaucracy will choose failure over change every time. And if I could close with one final thought. Victorious warriors, and this is a quote from Sun Tzu, a great quote, victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first, then seek to win. Thank you very much.